just like all of our other man-made macroeconomic variables, there are flaws with the CPI. There are shortcomings when it comes to the CPI. So here on this slide, we're going to talk a little bit about 3 different shortcomings in the CPI that may tend to overstate inflation or say that we have to spend more in our daily lives on our goods and services than we actually have to. The first one here is our substitution bias. So when we look at the CPI, we want a fixed basket of goods and services. We want to keep that basket consistent over time to see how prices are going up for the same goods and services. But it's human nature. When prices go up for one product, we're going to search out cheaper alternatives. We're going to substitute that something that's cheaper. The basket has a hard time dealing with that. You want to keep that composition the same. You don't want it to change because when you move different goods and services in there, it's going to change the price of the basket because different goods and services have different costs and have different values. We want to look at how the prices are changing for the same goods and services over time. That's inflation. So the example I always give, I always talk about coffee. And so I like to drink about maybe 1 or 2 cups of coffee a day. That's all I can handle. But I always ask my students if there's any big coffee drinkers out there. And you always find 1 or 2, they drink like 5 cups of coffee a day. And it's just like, oh my goodness, like how can you drink that much coffee? That's not healthy. But they drink a lot of coffee. So let's assume they're paying $1 per cup of coffee, right? Maybe they drink 5 cups of coffee a day and they pay $1 a piece over at our coffee house here at Rice University. You can buy their cup and then they have the policy. You can come in and just drop $1 in the bucket and fill up your cup of coffee. A lot of it's on honesty. It's a nice system. I like it. Okay. Now, what happens if there's some sort of issue with the supply chain of coffee beans out there so that the coffee house has to go from $1 a cup of coffee there to $10 a cup of coffee? What are you going to do? Are you going to stop drinking your coffee? Are you going to stop getting your caffeine? Well, no, if you're drinking 5 cups of coffee a day, you can't just go cold turkey on that caffeine. You're going to be all irritable and angry. I always talk about the nice squirrels we have running around on our campus. They're really nice and gentle. They'll come right up to you. You don't want to end up irritable chasing the poor squirrels around campus. Leave them alone, right? You got to get your caffeine somewhere. But you're not going to pay $10 per cup of coffee. You're going to substitute to something cheaper, maybe something like tea or some of those energy drinks out there. But again, the basket has a hard time incorporating that. So it's going to say, okay, you're drinking 5 cups of coffee a day at $1 a piece. You're paying $5 for your coffee. And then it's going to assume, okay, well, you're paying $10 a piece for your 5 cups of coffee. You're paying $50 for your coffee a day. When in reality, human nature says, no, we're going to find cheaper substitutes. I would have a hard time getting away from my coffee. I don't like the energy drinks too much, and I don't drink that much tea. I'm not a big fan. All right. So this is our first shortcoming. The second one is what we call our quality adjustment bias. All right, so I don't know, on the left-hand side, that's kind of like the first computer I ever had. I begged my parents for it back in the 1980s. Like, there's computers, you should see these things. I need one, I need one, I need one. I begged my poor parents until they bought that computer for me. And it wasn't today like we had all the software and it was easy to use and all the video games. I think I messed around with it once or twice and then it became an expensive paperweight. My poor parents. So it wasn't cheap though, it was new technology. I don't know, let's say a computer back then cost like $800. You can get a nice laptop for say like $1,200 today. So are you gonna look and say, okay, a computer back then was $800, a laptop today is $1,200. That is not a fair comparison, right? That is not a fair comparison at all. Most of us have phones in our pockets that are more powerful than the computer that my parents bought me in the 1980s. So yes, you're paying more for a computer today, but you're getting a lot more value in return. You can do a lot more with it. So what they do to try to combat this, they try to break up complicated products into their pieces and parts. I don't know, gigs and rams, or I'm not a big computer guy. They break it up into the gigs and rams, and they see how the prices change for the different components. And so that is how they try to deal with the quality adjustment bias. Just like a car today is much different than a car in the 1970s, right? You get a lot more out of a car today. They're like Wi-Fi and GPS, and you get a lot more value out of your car. So we have our substitution bias, our quality adjustment bias, and then our new goods bias. Okay, part of the new goods bias is, yes, as new goods come out, you can't substitute them into the basket. It has a hard time adjusting for that, incorporating that. But there's another part of our new goods bias. As new goods come out, there's a wider variety of goods that we can purchase with our income, with our money, with our dollars. What that means is the power of the dollar goes up in one way. It increases in its ability to purchase us utility. Remember our diminishing marginal utility of consumption. The more we have of any one thing, the less each unit means, the less utility it brings to us. So if we have an increased variety of goods, that increases the power of the dollar to purchase us utility. So again, the basket misses that, so it may overstate inflation. The last one here is it doesn't take into account inequality. GDP, remember, GDP per capita didn't do that. This doesn't do that as well. And so what we find is inflation can hit different parts of the income distribution differently. Just like many things, sadly, the people on the lower portion of the income distribution are often hit harder with things like inflation. They have a larger percentage of their income going towards things like food and gas and commodities that are often pretty inflationary. So it hurts low-income people more, and they have less means to shield themselves from inflation by doing things like buying assets, buying land that is going to increase as inflation goes up as well. So it doesn't distinguish between different people on the income distribution, okay? Doesn't take inequality into account. One of the reasons we care about the CPI here in the US is that we use it for policy, something called indexing. We index Social Security to the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index. What Social Security is in the United States, generally what it is, as people work, they pay into this fund so that when they retire, they can get a Social Security check each month in retirement to help maintain their standards of living. Okay, so we index the Social Security benefits to the CPI, and we especially care if the CPI may tend to overstate inflation. So here, you see me do this with the wages, with real wages. I'm just going to do it with benefits now. So our real benefit equals our nominal benefit over the price level. Now, what is the trouble with not adjusting our checks that we receive from Social Security every month as prices go up? Well, our purchasing power would go down. We want people to be able to buy the same amount of bread, eggs, and milk every month. So what we do, if the CPI says that there's 10% inflation, we want to increase that nominal benefit. That's an N, not a W. I don't have very good handwriting. Okay, we want to increase that nominal benefit by 10% to keep that real benefit the same. That is called indexing. Now, what is the trouble with the CPI overstating inflation? Well, it might say that we have 10% inflation when actually maybe it's about 8% inflation, but now that nominal benefit is going to go up by 10%, which means the real benefit goes up over time. Now, if you're receiving the benefit, that's great, right? Now I can buy bread, eggs, milk, and a Lamborghini. Maybe not. That's probably an exaggeration. But the real benefit goes up over time. If you're receiving that benefit, that's good, but it becomes more costly in real terms to the taxpayer. Social Security in the United States is struggling a bit to keep up as far as revenues versus expenditures. There's probably going to have to be some adjustments in the future to keep it solvent. And so this is one thing you might be able to do that's a little less political that could help with those solvency issues. But those are always difficult problems to overcome. There's a lot of politics involved. But here, if you don't adjust for it, it kind of exacerbates those solvency problems. So one reason we care about the CPI, it's used in policy. Here, what we call indexing. So there are some alternatives to the CPI. Okay, so talk a little bit about these alternatives. You have the Personal Consumption Expenditure Index. So the CPI, that comes from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. This one comes from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. This is the one actually that the Federal Reserve uses for their policy. They want to target about 2% in the core PCE. That's what they look at. The PCE usually shows inflation a little bit lower than the CPI, the way they go about calculating it, the way they go about weighting it. Okay. The next one here is our producer price index. So that comes from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. Instead of looking at the consumer side, it's looking at the producer side. It's looking at the prices that producers have to pay in order to produce. We like to look at the PPI because sometimes that can give us indications of what's going to happen to the CPI in the future. So if prices are going up for producers, often that's going to bleed into the consumers eventually. The last one here is our GDP deflator. And so this one is looking at production as well. But again, the PPI, that comes from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. The GDP deflator, we're back to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. This looks at how domestic prices of production change over time, subject to the rules of GDP.